So, call the special meeting to order Wednesday, May the 17th. It is currently 5:09. We'll begin with the adoption of the agenda. Anything to add from admin?
No, Your Worship, no.
Council? Okay, motion to adopt. Councilor
There's a
President
motion to adopt the agenda as presented.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor? That is carried. Brings us to new business for tax bylaw 60123. That's the tax penalty bylaw. Mr. Frank, you're going to take us through this.
Your Worship, did you acknowledge Councillor Williams?
No, I didn't. Councillor Williams, are you there? We'll just test out our tech here and make sure that you can communicate with us.
Yep, I can hear you guys.
Okay. All right, go ahead.
Okay, Your Worship, members of council, this is the tax penalty bylaw that has been since 1999. No changes to it. 6% on the dates of June 30th and 31st, and then the remaining paid the following year, previous year if not paid as well, and then August 31st as well, succeeding the year, as long as the taxes remain unpaid. So this is our standard bylaw, that tax penalty bylaw that we're using, and we're recommending no changes.
Councillor Wilhelm.
I'll motion that council gives a first reading of bylaw 601/2023 tax penalty.
Thank you. Any discussion on that motion?
Just a
Councillor-
question. Last year, we had a policy or bylaw that forgave,
Yeah, tax incentive bylaw?
so that was a bylaw, so that, does that bylaw need to be rescinded, or?
No, that was already appealed because it expired December 31st or whatever date it expired, so.
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
Any other questions to the bylaw or comments? Okay, there was a motion for first reading, so we'll vote on the motion. All in favor?
In favor.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Dean.
I'll move the council gives second reading to bylaw 60123, the 2023 tax penalty.
Thank you. Any discussion on that motion? All in favor?
In favor.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Anyone else? Councillor Wilhelm.
I'll motion that council proceeds to third and final reading to bylaw 601/23, the 2023 tax penalty.
Okay, very good. Any discussion? All in favor?
In favor.
Okay, I see that is unanimous. So we can proceed. Councillor Cloken.
I'll make a motion that council gives third reading to bylaw 601/23, 2023 tax penalty.
Thank you. Any discussion on that motion? All in favor? Councillor Devlin or Councillor Williams? Councillor Williams, can you hear me?
Sorry, in favor. I was muted there.
Okay, I got you. All right, so that's passed. That'll bring us on to our tax rate bylaw 600/23, 2023 property tax rate. And Mr. Frank, you're gonna take us through
Yeah.
this again.
Your Worship, members of council, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge Lam for helping and heavy lifting into the that is in the proposed tax rate bylaw in front of you. The numbers have been verified by myself and Lan in regards to that. We've also passed around to you examples of property, and we tried to find a residential property which had no assessment growth, and unfortunately this was one of the closest ones that we found is example one. And then a couple examples where you had a little bit of growth, and then a farmland example, as well as a commercial property. And then the last one is a non-residential, a industrial property in the whole bit. So it shows the impact on tax rate by, and again, understanding that if your assessment grows, increases, that percentage would also increase as a result of the changes in that. And we can go, and Lan can explain some of that. So as per last council meeting, council passed the budget, and the tax rate bylaw is proposed to collect $34 million, and then of which a balance of $29,450,081 would be raised by municipal property tax.
Any questions on this? I'm just trying to find the current number. Okay, so the total tax levy last year from residential, general, municipal was 21,280,049. Is that correct?
The one that I had, 11 by 17, the green and yellow.
Who are you asking, sir?
Well, I'm trying to ask.
Yeah,
this
your
to-
worship, members of council, I actually have that information, and I forgot to bring it down. So I can we have that information, it's just a couple seconds to grab it.
Yeah, I'm just on the website to the
It's a roughly 21 million?
2022, so.
Oh, you,
21,280,049 dollars.
yes, that's correct.
That's correct?
Yes, I believe that's the number. We always have to take the requisition off of the 27,251,000, and then we have to take off 5.9 million, so it's close to the 21 million. And I have that information, that's why I believe it was 21,280,000, so.
136, 417. So that's 88%, so that's 12 up, right?
Yeah,
That's-
and again, your worship, members of council, and with the understanding that if you have no new growth, right, that, and you increase your revenue by 3%, the tax rate increases by 3%. If you have new growth on top of that, and you add an increase, also, then that new growth is added to that, so.
Councilor Prestige?
Through the chair to the CEO. On our first residential, if the, went from 146,990 on assessment to 154,390, the taxes went down by about $5.
That's correct.
What caused that?
The school requisition and the senior foundation, I believe, in that, had that for one.
It was senior and schools.
Why would those go down?
Again, your worship, members of council, school requisitions are based on equalized assessment. So if our equalized assessment for the entire province, more share of the pie, then we pay more, right? Less share of the pie, they requisition less. So that's the case. So our equalized didn't keep up with the norm, right? Actually decreased, right? And therefore, the cost for school requisition goes down. And then seniors as well are based on equalized. Correct? Or am I wrong? I think, no, I'm wrong on that one. Yes, just based on the requisition that we have, yeah.
Well, according to this, the seniors on.
Went down
Tax
slightly.
went 33%.
Counselor Wilhelm?
And maybe you guys just explain this, but I'm just trying to, looking at the seniors requisition, should it not be a fixed tax rate, like for residential? You've got, in 2022, it's for the $150,000 assessment, it's, the taxation rate for seniors is 0.1102. And for the $300,000 property, it's 0.2202. Should they not be the same tax rate?
The Chair of Council, William, the tax rate for the senior, we have two foundation, one in Hillcrest and one is Pleasant View.
Oh, okay.
So we
I
have
see.
to set a two different rate, and also that is also we have the linear, so we also have another rate set separate for the linear, because the linear is can't be appointed to one area. So the linear is run across the province. So let's say if a pipeline or something, it would have to use that one calculate set rate applied to that property, if that makes sense.
Okay, so just the two examples here, though, one was in
Yeah,
the
so
region
one
and
would
department.
be in
We took
Pleasant
ones for
View and
Lansing.
one would be in Hillcrest.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So the other thing, your worship, members of council, just to let you know that this assessment is with the revisions that were on May 12th. So those have been included. However, it doesn't include any appeal that the non-residential may have already filed in regards to that. So there may be changes throughout the year or in the next 2 years, depending on how fast they get in front of the board. Yeah.
See, where this gets confusing for me is when you look at our plan to try and come back from this. We always use the same assessment numbers in the calculation. So the 3% annually generates 3% more in revenue. It matches up. Now, when we're talking about this, and I think what caused us a lot of grief back in, probably starting in 15 when the assessment started to drop, is that we weren't looking at revenue generation, we were looking at that darn tax rate. And now we're doing the same thing over again. And I don't know why we can't get our heads around revenue. And I really thought that's how we were looking at this whole thing, because at the moment, this looks like, if I get those numbers right, 88, so that was 21,280,049 in 2022 to 24,136,417, is a 12% increase.
So your worship, members, if I may, so in 20, was the first year of your recovery plan. So that's why there's not a 3% increase, because that's what you established the revenue as, right? Then if you look at the budget that we generated was 20 million, because the assessment relatively actually went down, and we, in order to create that 3% increase, we were supposed to collect 20,092,000. Then in 22, you collected, because you had a little bit of new growth, so you're back to your previous one. That 3% should have been around 20,695,000 based on what you collected in 2021. So those numbers are there, and that's correct in regards to this year. Council went and took that $1.7 million and now has put it in reserve pending outcomes of appeals. We've stayed within our 3% increase in taxes for that, but there is additional revenue because of the inflation numbers and the modifiers being adjusted, and those are that $1.7 million is put into reserves in the event that there are appeals, and we know that there are appeals coming.
Yeah.
Now, whether they'll be successful, that's a different, and there is additional revenue as a result. But the expenditure sides, we haven't changed our expenditure position, right? We're still on the 1% increase, and any additional revenue, if you remember the chart, the sheet last council meeting, it was a 400,000 additional revenue, and we only asked for 200,000 additional expenditures.
Yeah, and I guess that's what this council is gonna have to come up with, is really what the definition of a tax increase is. Because to my way of thinking, if I pay more money in dollars, that's a tax increase. I could have the mill rate, not the mill rate, the tax rate, stay the same, but my assessment goes down and I pay less. But I don't know if that's a tax cut, and I don't know if that's responsible for a municipality to maintain the same tax rate. I think the tax rate should actually go up to try and deal with that, because it's not gonna cost you any less to provide exactly the same services. And again, this is one of the reasons that we got in trouble back in 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So, well, 19 is when we started our recovery, but, and I'm surprised that we're doing the same calculation again by going 3% on the tax rate. So, I don't know how the rest of council feels, but I'm not feeling this. Councillor Colgan?
Yeah, I kind of have to tend to agree with that as well, because one of the things that we have to try to do as council is make it clear for ourselves, because if we're gonna go at some point in time into public engagement, where we try to explain this to our residents as to how we're trying to deal with this, I think we have to have a clear picture, and I think we need to really separate that. We really need to figure out exactly what the tax rate is, how it's adjusted, why we adjust it. And like Reeveboro says, we're at this point in time, we really aren't able to articulate what is a tax increase.
Councillor Wilhelm?
I guess to build off that idea, I think I understand what you guys are trying to say, and I agree. I think communication with residents and what the point of our tax increases are for, and what each thing on their assessment is going to look like for that tax increase. But in the end, we're still achieving our final goal, right, with regards to financial recovery, and also we are not putting enough money away into capital to pay for the assets that are depreciating it the way that they are. So as long as this is communicated as to why the increase is happening, I think residents are gonna understand, if only because we can explain to them, we wanna maintain your roads. Things have gotten more expensive over the years. This is the reason your taxes are going up. We wanna maintain, at least have the ability to maintain the service level that you have now. And we either do it year over year slowly until we get to a point where we're self-sustaining, or we just do one big bump in a year and make everybody have that pain that year. You know what I mean? So I think the economic recovery plan has given us the avenue to do those increases in smaller increments and spread over that recovery for a little bit more time, and I think the residents will understand it, as long as, like you said, it's communicated well.
Councillor Kush?
I do have concern, like you said too. I mean, unfortunately, the increase in assessment's kind of out of our hand. And if we back, say, our 3% off that we were looking at, and just going at 9% from last year into this one, doesn't meet our target that we're looking at for trying to put into reserves. So I don't know the best way to go. I don't like the idea of people perceiving that we're doing a 12% increase when, realistically the tax rate that we have control over is only 3%. But the other portions of it add up. I'm a taxpayer just like everybody else is here too, and everybody has to account for your money, and it can, especially, if you look at the numbers, especially on the commercial side, it can be a large hit to some of the commercial individuals, which I do have a concern for.
Yeah. Councillor Prestige?
What concerns me is if we do it like this, we're gonna have a 12% hit this year. And what happens next year if assessments go up again? We get another 12% hit? That's 24% in 2 years. I think we're gonna get real pushback right now.
See, and this is why I think these calculations need to be done from the revenue side, kind of working backwards more than anything. And in our examples on the recovery, because the assessment always stayed the same, I know the vernacular in the recovery is a 3% tax rate increase. But if you look at the example, you take last year over this year's revenue, and it's a 3% growth in the examples, because the assessment always stays the same. So the question to council would be, what if there was no growth in assessment right now? What if our assessment shrunk? Would we still just go up 3% on our tax rate? Because if we went up 3% in our tax rate, the difference in revenue generation might be 0. So our cost of doing business, our cost of doing all these activities and providing the service level that we have is actually going in the other direction from the revenue that we're generating. And if we don't put some kind of policy in place and start actually looking at the revenue generation number based on what our budget is, and the problem with this is it's a little bit like when I talk to people, it's a little bit like, well, a barrel of oil went up $20, but the price at the pump pretty much stayed the same. Nobody cares what a barrel of oil is. Nobody cares what their assessment is. Nobody cares what the mill rate is. They care what they pay in money at the end of the day. And if they do the math on their municipal taxes and they see 12%, and we said we were going to do 3, I don't know how we defend that, because that certainly wasn't my understanding of where we were going. So, and again, let's say next year the economy really crashes. Let's say the bottom falls out on oil and gas again, and we end up in a real nosedive. And we say we're going to increase the mill rate 3%, but we lose 5% out of our assessment, like we did in 2019. We'll end up going backwards. So that's why I'm asking that. So Councillor Prestige, you had your hand up, and then I'll go with Councillor Wilhelm and then
That's
Councillor.
exactly what I was gonna say in 2019. John and I proposed a 3% increase. And the rest of the council said, no, that's too much. 1.5% is plenty. Then the assessments went down, I can't remember how much it was. We actually went backwards that year. And that's when we really needed the money that year. And our income went down. So it's, I agree with John that we have to do it.
Wilhelm?
Yeah, I agree with that as well, moving forward and in the future when our books are balanced essentially, but right now they still aren't, right? We're still not contributing enough to capital. So if you looked in that, if you took that mindset, then we should be looking at what it takes, exactly all of our expenses, and then increase our taxation rates with growth included in that, based off of that. Well, then our taxation rate increase would actually be significantly more than 3%. Correct? Like if we were trying to make up the difference of what were you, I can't remember what the number was that you had told me before, but I think we're minus 6 million in capital that needs to be put into reserves.
We're currently spending 3, we need to spend between 7 and 8, depending on which.
So let's say 5 million.
Let's say 3 minus 7.5, something like that, so we're about 5 million shy.
5 million shy. So just going mindset then, should we not then be increasing our taxation rates right now to make up the difference?
Well, and again, I don't
want to.
That's a different strategy than what we talked about in the 5-year recovery. So, again, I want to know what this council thinks 3% is. Because if we're going 3% on the mill rate or the tax rate, we're going to slit our throats again. I guarantee it. It may not be next year, it may not be the year after, it may not be 10 years from now, but somebody's going to slit their throats because that's exactly what happened to us last time.
Just to respond to that, I don't think, so when you guys came up with the economic recovery plan, you couldn't guess how much growth would go up or go down. That would be impossible. You have to stick that it's going to be flat and we're going to increase the taxation rate based on 3% on a flat growth, because there's impossible for you at the time to guess if it was going to go up or go down. So you assume it was flat and increase your 3% based off of that rate. That makes sense, and I think if you explain that to anybody, they would say, yeah, of course, why would you guess what the growth would be? Nobody could know at that point. We don't, but we also have to be, as legislators, flexible. So again, if we say we're in the recovery plan that with flat growth, we're only going to increase 3% year over year, and then all of a sudden we have a time of decreased growth rate, well, of course you'll have to increase the taxation rate to make up the difference. If residents don't understand that, then it needs to be explained to them. But just because we've said we're only going to increase taxation rate by 3% on flat growth, and then growth changes, that's not us or you lying. That's the situation changing. That's the plan changing, because there is a factor there that we have no control over. So I think that your original wording around your economic recovery plan of a 3% tax rate increase over 5 years makes sense and is defensible to the residents, because we didn't lie. You're not changing it. You had no control over the growth. It's a variable you have no control over. And the growth is good not only for our administration and the pocketbooks of the administration, but it's good for the residents as well. Their property values are going up with these increased assessment values. So we're not the only ones gaining value out of it, so are the residents as well.
So I just want to ask a question when you talk about growth. Define growth.
Well, growth would be the assessment increases on the properties. Is that not growth?
So that's not new builds. That's an assessment increase in market value, correct?
I don't know. I think by growth, I would overall assessment of all the properties in the municipality, would it not?
No. Well, that's why I'm saying there are no nailed down definitions for these things. And if this council doesn't put together a solid tax policy, we're going to keep going round and round every time we go to set a mill rate. And in my this is why I was using the plates, maybe I need my plates back, but the plates in the little cups, so that the value of the plate increases. That's a growth in assessment. But just because the growth in assessment happened, like let's say it went up by 30%. Let's say the value of your house went up by 30%. Did the cost to provide our services, to plow the roads, to maintain the roads, to do all those things, did our cost of doing business go up 30%? Because I don't think it did. It'll go up by a percentage, because the market's increasing, there is a certain amount there that you gotta deal with. But you end up outpacing, if you leave mill rates the same. What I'm saying is that we need to get a hold of this tax policy, and we need to decide what our definition of increase in assessment under market growth is going to be determined as. What do we do with new growth, new builds? So again, if it's a garage that somebody now is parking 2 cars inside and they're driving down the same roads that they always did, and they're not beating up infrastructure, they're not doing anything different to the infrastructure, is that an increased cost to us? Not really, but there's an increased growth to the assessment because he's added a 2-car garage. So there's a new build there that goes with it. It's not an increase in market value, it's a new build. But there's no increase to provide service for it. Now, it's an industrial development that we're providing services to, and we had to smash a road into it, and we've got all this weight on our industry, then we have to look at that differently. But until we sit down and actually have an honest conversation about this as a council, and this is why I'm trying to make sure that we have this conversation. We should have had this conversation a long time ago. But the point that I'm trying to make is this: the 3% increase is supposed to be, to my understanding, was supposed to be in revenue, not in the mill rate. And again, if we're going on mill rates all the time, I think we're walking into danger.
It's great when they're going up, it sucks when it goes.
Sorry, Councillor Dean, you and then Councillor Copeland.
And one other thing we have to take into account when we're having this conversation is that assessment increases by property isn't necessarily uniform. So it becomes really difficult then to make that call as to what percentage you want to increase your tax rate. I agree with Jeremy. I hear what you're saying, John, and I think that's a conversation, quite honestly, for another time. I think we're still within that economic recovery program that a previous council put in place. It's bearing fruit, and I think we should stay the course with it.
Councillor Copeland.
Yeah, I think this is a bit of a difficult conversation, but I completely understand that there's got to be a relationship between the cost of the increase in services, which is an inflationary factor. We also have to try to understand whether that inflationary factor is also somehow in the increase or decrease in assessment. And I don't think we've ever seen a decrease in assessment and a decrease in inflation. I think that those are related, so there's something to build a policy on. But I really do believe figure this out in a different way, because we can definitely go through with the recovery plan, but if we don't have a conversation now over how we're going to proceed with a policy in the future, because the recovery plan basically is a policy. It's what you guys decided that you're going to do to recover. So if this is starting to show us some of the cracks, I think we need to identify them. And then I think we need to figure out and have that conversation. How are we going to make this work so that our budgeting is not based on what the tax rate is, but it's based on what it costs us to deliver the service.
Councillor Wilhelm.
Through the chair to administration, just looking at this spreadsheet here, you've got under residential and farmland, you've got residential improvements and residential improved land. What is the difference between those two categories?
Do you want to ask her, or I can? No, go ahead.
Because that what you're talking about, are these the two different categories you're talking about, Mr. Reed? Improvements on land and improved land by new builds? Is that what that would be?
No, it's a category in the farmland. So every site has a 3-acre site. So if that 3-acre site on the farmland is vacant, then that's farmland vacant land. Correct.
And then the improvement is the house or the structure built on the land.
Right, so what would residential improvements, what residential, like what does that mean in this category?
Building.
Building
A building, so
Yeah.
what's residential improved land?
is the land.
The land has improved in regards
It's
to,
gain value?
i.e., you've knocked down the trees and then now put it into production, right? That can be improved land. It can also be the market has changed in regards to, no, I'm wrong on that. So,
Wouldn't that also be, if, like residential improved land, if a piece of property didn't have a residence on it and then a resident was built on it?
that's correct, yeah.
So I guess then that would essentially be a new build then. Why do we have two different taxation rates up until 2021 for those two different categories and now a flat taxation rate?
Your worship, members of council, years ago, Woodlands County established a policy to have zero on residential improved land. And municipal affairs came in and said you can't have a zero tax rate. And they passed legislation that difference between residential and non-residential has to be a 5-to-1, right? So your lowest mill rate is considered 5-to-1. So if you look at in 2020, you were at 6.5, and then you were at 5.9, and now you're down to 3, because we had to bring that into alignment. And council passed a motion to bring it up by 2023, which this year was required.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Another thing to consider when we're having that discussion about how to arrive at a policy that directs the tax rate is the costs to provide services. Those are not static either. So even outside of inflationary costs, fuel and various other factors that contribute to maintaining the equipment, there's also sometimes decisions by council to provide a service that wasn't there before. So that becomes an extra expense that you can't necessarily forecast right now. So every year, the revenue side and the expense side are going to be different. It's never going to be static.
So, and I would suggest that if you're going to supply a new service, then you better have it costed.
Right.
And you better have a budget in place that generates that revenue and be aware that you're increasing your service level. So when I was talking about this whole thing, we were talking about no changes to service level. No increases in inflation or cost to provide service. So if we get to looking at this and say, okay, we said we're gonna do a 3% increase in revenue, and we have, what's our current rate of inflation, is it 7?
I think it ended at 6.2%.
So 6.8 last year.
Somewhere in there.
So if we end up at, because we've actually cut services from where they were in 19, right? We had to, because we couldn't afford to provide them on the budget that we had. And a large part of that was because we left the mill rate alone. So I could support going 6 or 7% for inflation. That gets us around 10. But at least then you have an actual number that you've said to people that this mill just cranking that by a percentage and saying, well, that's gonna do the trick. It doesn't work. And it's, like, we're lucky in the fact that it's going up in assessment. So the question that I'm asking, I guess, let's say there was no increase in assessment this year, and we had nothing increase in assessment. We still had our inflationary pressures, all of our costing, all the rest of it. And everybody said, well, we said we were only gonna go up 3% in the mill rate. Would we even be having this conversation, or would we go right to the revenue call? Because we go right to the revenue call and say we need to make 3% more at least in revenue. Councillor Wilhelm?
So going back to that discussion about only doing a 3% increase on revenue only, we still know that we're 4.5 million. We still have a 4.5 million deficit due to capital. So what's 3%? It would take 15 years to ever get to that point, if not more. I still think, regardless of how we don't want to, like at 12% is a large increase, we're still running this municipality at a deficit for our residents. So, yeah, 12% is a big hit, but I think it just needs to be explained to them. We're still running at a deficit, even though only a 12% increase, which is only 3% rate increase from us. The rest is growth. We're still running at a deficit.
I agree, but that wasn't the economic recovery plan. The economic recovery plan was supposed to be a 3%, and then we were gonna deal with the rest of it later, so.
But the wording says 3% tax rate increase.
It does, yeah.
That might not be what you
And if
meant it to be,
But
but that's what it is.
if you look at, and this is part of the problem, so you guys see this. New council sees this, right? You see our council saw this. This is what I saw. That's a 3% increase in revenue. And they're two completely different things. So, again, I can't support that increase. That's where I'm at. So if somebody wants to make a motion, we can go, but I agree with everybody saying that we can certainly use the money. I get it. I've been saying that we need the money back in 2019. I said, let's bump the mill rate. We needed to, but we have to start doing this calculation based on revenue, or we're going to be in trouble. And we only have 2 years left on this council. So that means we set the mill rate 2 more times? Do we get 2 more times to set the mill rate? And 2 years have gone by for us already. So if we don't have this conversation, we don't get a solid tax policy in place before the next election happens, and this council doesn't actually nail this down. I've been talking about this for 6 years and we still haven't nailed it down. Councillor Wilhelm.
To the chair, why haven't you brought it to a GNP meeting then? Why haven't we discussed it?
I had conversations where I thought that we were on the same page, and I'm finding out that we weren't on the same page. So I wasn't even aware it was a problem until we saw this, this budget. Or sorry, not this budget, but this tax bylaw. Because this is the first year that we've seen this is the first year we've seen a market increase in assessment. So in the past, the numbers floated very close to that 3%. Councillor Dean?
So if I'm hearing you correct, John, what you would like to do is you'd like to eliminate that 3% and use the assessment increase to increase our revenues, and then next year, or shortly after this is passed, get to work on crafting a tax rate bylaw. So I'm asking you.
Say the first part again.
So you would eliminate the 3% increase on the tax rate and just use the increase to assessment as the the factor that increases our revenue?
I don't know where, like I said, I could support the increase of 3% plus, 6.5, 7% inflation, which would be a 10% increase in revenue. And then whatever the mill rate needs to be based on that, I can support that. That gets us to an actual place, and I think it's defensible, and I think it's responsible, and I think it's kind of year one of how we go about this. But once we come out of that, then we need to sit down and have an honest conversation about how we deal with new assessment, how we deal with service levels, and so that we're very, very, very aware of this when we're budgeting, and that works in tax policy. So does that answer your question?
It does, but it leads to a question for administration. If we're going to ask them to bring us back a different formula to consider, when are they going to do that? When are we going to meet? When are we? What are the deadlines that they work within in order to get the tax notices out?
You can probably do these numbers in about 15 minutes.
Okay, but when are we going to meet again?
15 minutes?
Unfortunately, no. I don't mean the top part, the residential, not a problem. It's the non-residential, because you have machinery and equipment, you have a number of different subcategories that you have to do that calculation and figuring it out. These are all rolled up. So again, and the difficulty in the example that we use is a prime example that we know that that client is more than likely going to appeal, and there's substantial assessment changes to that property where you could be, instead of a 3% or a 10% increase, in the hole because of that, right? So that's the danger of when you're setting the tax rate, you're setting a tax rate at the time of the information without appeals in place. If you lose all those appeals, and again, I can't say whether you win or lose or it gets adjusted, right? You have no contingency in your budget for that at this point in time. And that's why when we made the proposal last week, we said this money is putting into your reserves in the event that you have a decrease in assessment. And that's the difficulty with doing a 3% tax increase, right? Because that number, that target always moves, and then we have appeals up until 2 years after the fact because of I call it the municipal government board. There's the new board that takes time to make their decisions. So that's the problem, right?
Councillor Wilhelm.
Through the chair to council, I 100% appreciate the conversation that's happening and that more thought needs to go into this. It's not the time to do it at the 11th hour. We should have talked about this months ago, right? I respectfully disagree that it was going to take a short amount of time to fix these numbers. So what do? We can't. We've asked administration to put all these numbers together based off of the information that we've given them previously, and now we want to change it at the last second. It's putting undue stress on administration. We should have talked about this months ago.
Well, we couldn't talk about it months ago because we didn't have the assessments months ago. So you can't talk about it months ago. So let's be realistic there. The reality is that you don't know what this is going to come out to until you get the assessments plugged in. When you get the assessments plugged in and then you see that rate, sorry, I'm spider down here. You get that rate and you see the 12% number overall. And it would have been nice if we had some options worked into this, but this is the only option that we have on the table right now. Cause I had this conversation, so.
And just to follow it up, I mean, in a typical situation with the municipality and government finances, do you not typically set a budget for the year and then set your taxation rate based off of that budget? And since we're running at a deficit, we can't do that. Like, that would be in my opinion, the intelligent way to set a taxation rate, not based off of revenue increases or growth increases. Well, I mean, the tax policy would take that all into account, but we're still $4.5 million in deficit. So if we were, again, if we had generated as much money as our expenses, this wouldn't be a problem. We could adjust the tax rate as needed to change it. But right now, if we decrease any amount on here, we're just putting ourselves further in the hole, and we're putting the municipality further in the hole.
It's not quite that, because it's a contribution to, and keep in mind, like I've sat here and listened to council approve new expenditures that weren't in the budget. So it's kind of, it's not fun for me to sit here and listen to, well, we need the extra tax money. And we do need the extra tax money. I'm not arguing that we don't. What's frustrating me here is that we talked about a 3%, we're ending up at 12, and next year, what's it gonna be again? So, again, year after year, the same thing keeps happening, and I can't keep sticking my hand in the air for it.
Your worship, members of council, and I did just a quick number is, even if you did a 10% and the one that we know that is appeal and was successful, you're back to your 3% increase. So the number right now, we anticipate you'll lose $1 million if the one company is successful in their appeal. So you're back to that 10% difference. So right now, you're at a 10% increase. And again, that's the big if, right? And we know that that company has already filed their appeal. That's with the unknown, right? And we know the reason for the appeal and the argument. Whether they'll be successful, it's a policy change that the government, but it is a third party making a decision. And we all know when a third party makes a decision, sometimes they get it right, and sometimes they make up things that we all
Yeah.
question.
So you're saying it's 10%, not 12?
No, I'm saying if I use that number, 10%, and doing the increase in revenue from last year, it's around $23 million, and then there's about 728,000, and the one appeal is $1 million if they're successful.
So can you get us that tax rate information in time to set the mill rates at that 10%?
That number, you'd have to do it this way, right? No, I'd have to, it's easier to do it this way.
Councilor Dean?
So I just need something clarified, Mr. Reed.
Yep.
So would it be fair to say that your expectation is that what we were gonna be presented with was a couple of options to consider?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, your worship, that was at the last meeting when we did present to you whether or not you were putting that $1.7 million, and council approved that 1.7 million. So once you did that, we knew, based on that budget that was approved, this was the number that came out. right? This is the number that was working, right? And we did have that conversation at the last meeting.
Counselor Dean?
Yeah, and with all due respect, I think I know I can speak for myself that the information that came out during the conversation was anything but crystal clear. I sensed I wasn't the only one that was confused.
So, I'm gonna suggest that we take a quick break here, cause
You have a P and G, so you have to recess and go into your P and G. And then you can, after the P and G, then you can come back to your special council meeting. Could do that.
council okay doing that? I need a break here.
That's what we gotta do.
So we'll recess the special meeting on, what are we on, item 2? Computer, completely this thing. 3.2. 3.2. No.
Yeah.
3.2, yeah. And we'll recess it and come back to it. Do we need a motion for that?
Yes.
Is somebody, Counselor Colton?
I'll make
To
the motion
reset?
that we
Yeah,
recess.
you need a motion to recess.
We never do.
Yes, you do.
Okay, there's a motion to recess and
Thank
we'll
you.
come back. Any discussion? All in favor? Okay,
In favor.
Can't have two.
thanks.